Hey folks, so today as part of a panel for IndieCade Horizons, it's one of these things where whenever I'm a part anymore of a panel or a talk where I'm not paid for it, which there's a time and place for that, basically as part of that arrangement, I make sure I have permission to be able to repost at least my part of it, just because mostly moving towards paid speaking things, done a whole lot of talks over the years for free, so here's, I don't know, some of them just for example I'm referring to. Anywho, so what follows is my part of a panel discussion about the core premise here being, okay, well, if you can, maybe the summer break is coming up, right? This specifically is focusing on, say, college students or folks who have that kind of rhythm. And so with some summer projects, what might they do? How might that fit into their career or their path as game makers? So that's most of my answers here relate to. You'll hear kind of a few different topics. I think it's mostly clear from context. I thought about it to try to insert some question cards. You'll be able to figure out what's going on, especially with the camera cuts as to when there's a shift in question. Anyway, it's a variety of points I find myself bringing up over the years with students, people I run into at GDC, people I work with at home team, which is to say that even though the original context here was summer projects for students, it's a broadly applicable thing for if you are somewhere in that early phase of game development between you've done tutorials, you've maybe done some jams, you might be either pre-career or considering career and thinking about what projects you take on next might be related to that. So you'll hear us talk about portfolio thoughts, about the nature of doing outside projects if you're at another job. We'll talk about the choice of what kind of projects you're making. Is it important, and how or why to release it, and all that kind of thought. So anyway, without further ado, here is my part of that panel discussion, locally recorded from IndieCade Horizons here in 2025. Sure. Hey folks, I'm Chris. I long history with IndieCade. I volunteered in 2007 at E3's booth, finalist in 2010. Helped organize speakers for several years, and then helped organize our alumni for years after that. Games-wise, I'm making games since 1997, starting as a hobbyist, professionally since 2005, but a lot of my focus has actually been on helping build communities to help other people build their games, especially kind of beginner to intermediate level. Often it's kind of like past their game jam level, but also kind of smaller than, like, they're not university capstone scale or complexity or sophistication. And over the years, hundreds of kind of games have come through that kind of pipeline, so I got podcasts, audiobooks, video courses, YouTubes, and things that kind of encourage that, but that's often a crowd I'm working with about trying to navigate their career transitions or exploring, do they want to do this as a job, moving up their levels of skill sets and stuff, but that's the main things about me. Sure, yeah, I'm always happy to chime in, but want to make sure I'm not filling up too much time because I'm used to podcasting. I'll just kind of fill up around the clock. But basically, the first thing we're asking them is what their goal is, where they're trying to go with it. If they don't have something in mind, they're like, you can kind of wander in different directions, and part of what I've seen is people will spend years making progress in a direction that's not actually compatible with what they actually want in terms of, are they trying to move towards a bigger company, a small company, is there a certain genre they're into, a certain technology they're into, and this is where part of those outside projects can be really beneficial, because obviously degrees, certifications, qualifications, those networks, those are all super valuable, but often they exist in something that's kind of calcified or slower moving than, oh, what I really need right now for my portfolio is a VR project, or I've been learning in Unreal at school, I want to show I can do a Godot project or something else. What opens a different door that fits what they're after, that doesn't have the same constraint of, well, for class credit, it had to be XYZ schedule or XYZ team size. And again, it's just a fundamentally different experience if the reason they're doing this is they want to experiment in modeling and they've been a programmer. They want to try to do more level design or something where they don't have the rungs yet for the job to give them that chance, or they don't have classes at their school for that. Then can they design a project where basically that is the focus and everything else kind of falls by the wayside of how little can they do on sound and art and other stuff to show, because the portfolio, right? And this is where, like, on portfolio, plenty else I have to say about this later. It is just trying to they're trying to sell themselves, not the game. And this is what I'm trying to talk to them about, prioritizing with the project design for this, is what's going to help you show I'm the person who can do the thing you need done, which is not the best game necessarily, and to not spread their energy trying to also, unless they care to be for their own reasons, a writer and an intense, deep back-end programmer and a network person, just what sets them up with as little else as they have to. And this is the other important part, that those projects finish. And this has been a huge part of our approach to things. One of my main video course this past year or two has been about finishing projects. If it's not finished, the outside world doesn't believe it's real in many cases. And there's frustrations about that. I wish it was not that shape. If there's some way you can put a bow on it, even if it means scope compromised, characters or squares, whatever, game is released so strangers can play it, it just counts so much more in the outside world's eyes. And so that then is the other priority of what objectives will build me stepping stones in the direction I want to go, and that I can still finish the thing is the other kind of big question for that I ask him. Point about these trying on different things, like the portfolio felt scattered. That is, I want to reassure everybody how everybody has to start out. And the part of the challenge, right, is that it's until you've tried on different shoes, it is impossible or premature to figure out, am I a spreadsheet person? Am I a modeler? Am I a programmer? And I think that's why oftentimes people in school are like, am I all these things? But it's I think part of the journey going through that stuff. And I like Karn's point of like looking for what people are looking for. Rob Coble was our career advisor for a bunch of years in our group. He came out of career advising for Full Sail down in Florida, I think. And he always tell people like look for job listings and then treat that like a checklist. Like our reflex is to see a job listing. Oh, I'm not that person. Slide it off the table. No, they've told you what to do. That job's going to be gone, but there's a cycle that comes up of like what shape a current technical designer hires for, which shape a current X, Y, or Z type of programmer hires for, and to use those as like, okay, what projects can I do that check off as many of those, 85% of those as I can. Part of like these questions, like what are people going for, is often this question of timeline. How aggressively do they need to find an answer versus do they have wiggle room? Because it is a very different fundamentally approach and prioritization. And that's where, as much as anything, obviously, for a lot of what drives people towards games as a field is their motivation, their interest in it. And there may be puzzles of, is there a way in, but it's not the line of work or not the genre or not the thing that's your interest, but does it get you that job sooner? Which for certain types of companies or roles, there may be some lateral opportunity of you go in as one thing and try to inch your way. Oh, we lost our writer. Do we need help writing? Can I help fill in some other? See it happen. It's rare. It's hard to count on. But there's also this part there where a lot of folks, and as we saw this at Georgia Tech from some of our students there, I think one guy was going off to a company, and I don't need to name the company. It was a long time ago. Other students were kind of skeptical of like, why are you going to work for that company? I thought you thought games should be art, and I thought you thought games should be like cooler than like just kind of judging this person by it. And then that person on graduation got the job on Psychonauts 2 from his former coworkers he met on that other team because it's a big old network and a big old industry. And meanwhile, other people kind of like thumbed their nose at that internship, didn't have that sort of footing to get that head start into their early career. And so to not feel like this first thing I take has to be the only last thing I'm going to be forever, they're all ways to meet other people. We're a small industry, people bounce around. One thing, and I think it's not actually disagreeing with anything anyone's here said. So there's this question that often comes up, and people are trying to figure out navigating the early career stuff like, should a resume be one page or multiple pages? Should I list my outside interest or not list my outside interest? And the tricky thing is, every recruiter at every company is a different human being. And I've heard strong opinions from recruiters who are like, don't ever put your other interest. Always put your interest. We definitely want to see your objective. I don't like objectives. And there's like all of these are true paths for certain people at certain places. And some of the time it becomes a question of like, for that recruiter, if I'm trying to work somewhere that Christy Stoll is the recruiter, what is she looking for? Has she given a talk online about what they recommend or something? You could do some sort of forensics, but it is a different thing. It's also a little bit of how narrowly specialized somebody is. And this is where, again, like if someone can keep a server running and that's their job, if someone can write secure code and they can speak to that in interviews, and or this is also sometimes a difference of a lot of people I work with, increasingly the past 10 years, as opposed to the first 10 before that, don't typically have they don't have graduate degrees. They don't have degrees from recognized schools and like, or game specific kind of related things. And so sometimes they don't have the same sort of credibility shortcut or basically to leverage of like, and I had the follow through of someone who went through an intense program, got good grades, etc. And so for some of them, I think increasingly the finishing projects help show I'm not someone who's kind of out there wandering around, not doing or not kind of following through on stuff, because grades in a certain kind of way also show I can do the work, I'll follow through, and also I have things in this kind of skill sort of overlap of the Venn diagram of seeing that person doing that role. So those are sometimes maybe factors that we see. So specifically the German question about how finished does it need to be, because to my position, it's a distinction I'm careful about making. I might use the word finished there, try to encourage released rather than finished. I think finished gets in our heads about all the stuff I had up front when I was first envisioning the project, which is realistically not how most commercial games release either. They all wish they had a whole bunch of stuff that didn't make the cut. Instead, and this is again producer mindset, like Karn said, I start with like, I'm releasing the best versions I can by August 15th. And that might mean I cut a bunch of stuff, I sweep things under the rug, but I made the hard trade-offs, I faced my own tech debt, I surfaced and dealt with the sides of the systems I was kind of ignoring versus just doing the part that kind of seemed fun to me. And I think that zooming out, the real reason why I also like finishing stuff or releasing stuff is it keeps us getting that variety. And I think a lot of our learning comes from the repetition of those patterns. Sometimes, and again, it might depend on how narrow someone's specialization is. But I was a technical game designer early in career and then a producer. And so my skills were more soft-ish, etc. And in those kind of cases, the variety really helps strengthen my ability to kind of draw from those or make comparison points versus if I like writing increasingly good shader processing, rendering pipeline stuff, which, you know, I knew a person at id Software as a programmer. His hobby project was this like really, really impressive Viking axe that you could rotate. and he would spend like years on that rotating Viking axe. Not only is it not finished, it's not a game. It's just like, but you'd look at it and be like, we need to hire that guy. That's how did he do it? It is, again, it's a challenging thing of there's many different, depends on context is unfortunately the super unhelpful answer. At the high level, what I tend to look for is, and I think this draws to a more general point, some people make the mistake on their portfolio, their itch page, their whatever, trying to sell the user on the game. It's exciting, it's interesting, it's dramatic, it's whatever. And I have to remind them, you're trying to sell them on you and your skills and that you can solve the problem that they have. And so if there's a part of that project you can highlight about how the tanks follow the procedural terrain and show a GIF about that and tell the story how you did that and emphasize that in the portfolio. And sure, there's a bunch of other things. The reason you're doing it is because you're really into, like, these dragons are fighting tanks and it's really interesting to you, but you're not a writer, you're not applying to be a writer. Because sometimes the game we're also trying to play is to not create the effect of, I want to show I'm passionate about this, and I practice this in my own time. Those do impress people. I don't look like I have a foot out the door. Like, my goal is to use this as a stepping stone to get the heck out of here and do my own thing. And so as long as I can still kind of show how this relates to what they want out of me, and that the rest of this is kind of, it's part of it, and I'm excited again about Steam ships, but I'm doing the rendering stuff, and can I emphasize that that's the part I'm really kind of zeroing in and spotlighting. Most of them, right, are not actually downloading and playing the game. They're looking at the videos on the page, they're reading about it, and you can choose which slice you want to emphasize as to what's relevant to the kind of company you're applying to. I do want to spotlight a thing I said that I really like, and again, this is basically you're not showing the full everything you've ever done every time you're applying somewhere. It's what interests them, like density, and also the work you put into tailoring those CVs. I know it's frustrating for people, but it's very much like if they're just sort of scattershotting without much thought or consideration to the targets, it's not like just a pure numbers game. It really does make a difference. There may be qualified people who don't get the role, but it's got to be out of one of those people who probably tailored for that role, as opposed to folks who you can tell kind of littered the same thing 300 directions. And as part of also being careful about asking even coworkers' opinions on stuff, etc. Again, anything that could feel like it could overlap that company. Some states have better protections for this. I think Washington does. California, it's 2870 is the labor code. If it's done on your own time, with your own energy, own resources, own materials, whatever, they can't claim it. And anyway, again, not all states have that. You live in certain states, you do whatever work. They can kind of own whatever salaried people make. The puzzle I ran into, this is part of why I quit Electronic Arts, was my frustration. I need to be doing lots of things to be happy outside where else the day job is. And my puzzle was I could get, my producer was cool with it, my lead designer was cool with it, executive producer was cool with it. He was like, but actually it goes to the legal team. They have to answer the question. And the problem I ran into, and I get logistically what's going on here, they basically have to default to say no, because they're however many insane number of dollars per hour to even look at the details. They're like, we can't devote our resources to assessing this. Now, realistically, unless it makes an enormous amount of money, it's not going to Minecraft. They don't really probably care, right? So if anything, it was mostly that people were encouraged, like, just do it on the table. We have artists who on the side are selling their stuff in ways they shouldn't, but like, shh, everyone just be cool. And I was like, I don't feel comfortable with that. And so part of my condition when I to a startup was like, I need to be able to do my outside stuff, or you cannot have me working for you. And I was in a position to kind of negotiate that. But that is very, very hard, because even in those situations, they still don't want to kind of blank check it too much, because it's very, they're worried about you're going to go do what we're kind of like setting you up to do for somebody else or for yourself or something. And so there's a range. But I still know people on big, massive, some of the biggest AAA teams who are they got games on Steam under a different brand. At no point anywhere ever do they mention what their day job is, the name of the company, when they're on interviews and there are articles about it. You can't tell. It's complete big, thick line between the two. And if I can sneak in a version of this, so like, let's say you're going to GDC or some other, even a local meetup or something, and you have a business card for the day job, still make your own business cards for who you are, right? Exist separately from the company that right now is employing you. Unless they are assigned you on for the next 50 years, they probably haven't. You still need to be you, and you can be some other more dimension or bigger than the current role at the current place that I'm at. And that means having an identity for like, let me give this card instead. And these also the speak to, and so like Katie's that has posted some of her, again, these are B-Sky posts from Katie Chirona's, worked on Elsinore, indie game that went through IndieCade some years ago, also day job with a bigger game company, so maybe another relevant to our previous chat. But, and they're kind of a little kind of funny, a little silly, but it's also, again, there's many different types of writing that go into games. But we're back to kind of the earlier question of, so that sim recruiter I kind of just mentioned earlier, Christy, friend of mine, she used to be like, people like, how do I get a job in the game industry? She's like, well, we need forklift drivers, we need lawyers, you need accountants. Like, do you want to be more specific? If the goal is just to be in a company finding a role, like there might be a role, but what actually speaks to your goals and your interests, your ambitions and stuff? And this is where, I don't know, I'm a big fan of like Outer Wilds, another game with a long history back in IndieCade stuff. and that kind of writing is very impressive. I guess my hand wave answer again is someone who's not advised writers. It may sound like an easy move, but if you go find writer portfolios of online that you like, that you're impressed, it's obviously you're not copying them to figure out what about their format you like, because it's going to be your own work, your own things. But the plus side of portfolios, they're all online. They have to be. So you can, crib notes on what you like about others. Depends on context of the people. To me, those answers are the same thing, in that in order to learn a tool or technique, I need to be applying it to something. And this is where maybe what changes me is that I kind of picture a dial of how original or ambitious is this. So in our group, we've got people who maybe made 15 Unity games. They're trying Unreal or Godot for the first time. They're going to dial way back their ambition with doing the project, but they're still going to try to make a project with it. And that winds up helping to answer a lot of really practical questions about how do I do things with this tool that come up versus, and I think of if I tried to learn Blender, if my goal is to make a thing with Blender, I will find ways to solve. I need a certain kind of shape, how to go about that. What I can't do is sit down and learn the 300,000 options and all of the menus and all the drop downs in case those come up for something. I'm very kind of like woodshop mentality. I'm going to make a lathe learn the lathe by making a gavel, learn the router by making a picture frame. I base my learning in so if nothing else, even if it's a very, very new tech platform, clone Breakout or something, right? Pick a small target, would be my way to get a handle on if I do want to learn a new tech pipeline, but it's that originality ambition dial. About should they be working on teams or solo projects? I'm a strong advocate of teams, in part because it gets people to have to articulate and describe and make their case to others. What are you doing? Why are you doing it that way? And it can, I know it can feel like a point of friction if you're used to in solo projects, we have to explain ourselves to anybody, and it's kind of nice. But that is also part of why if someone has not shown as much team experience, it can come across as can they communicate with others? Are they comfortable not being defensive about receiving feedback and coordinating and stuff? And that's where, to me, it's so important to be doing teams, especially if it's part of kind of career trajectory. I'm always trying to encourage people to always be networking, even when you're in a job. Always be preparing for whatever next tool, tech, whatever change. Games changes severely every 5 to 7 years. Folks who stay in this longer than one role typically are training themselves for what's next. The company is not setting them up for the next big shift in most cases. But back to as far as the other ways to pivot our work outside of games, I'm always trying to remind folks that most jobs in the universe, at least on Earth, do not have a specific credential for it. And people get themselves in this pigeonholed mindset. I have a programmer degree. I need a programming job. I'm only a programmer, can only program. Lots of jobs. If you're a reasonable person, if you can solve problems, if you can be patient with people, if you can communicate with people, if you have a network of people who trust you, there's a whole bunch of jobs. They just need to have somebody reasonable who can work with others and kind of be trained a little bit on the position or whatever. But to broaden the horizon beyond, okay, well, I specialize my training in this for 4 to 6 years, so that's going to be the rest of my life. There's a whole bunch of stuff that needs done, that you are as capable as anybody if you've been on projects that move forward and you've worked with people who have different skill backgrounds. Those are all real skills that all kinds of project managers and other kind of roles that all kinds of other companies and soft skills need. And it can feel but I trained in these technical things. Over time, there's again whole range of problems that you can surprise yourself be more valuable in some ways to organizations if you're dealing with different layers of problems than that. Nothing wrong with that. I was also comp sci degree, but there's no credential for what I'm currently doing. I'm happy. Thanks for hosting and inviting us out. Thanks everyone for being here.